I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues Live. Please pay attention to our warning graphic. It states that the Retro Rogues Live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. Again, I want to welcome you here to the show. My name is Dave Beatty. I'm one of your hosts. For nearly the last 30 years, I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer. Worked on a lot of fun things that some people have heard of, such as Justice League of America, Batman Incorporated, and Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. My current love, though, is my t-shirt company, Kirby Tees. You can see a lot of what we have to offer over there, as well as possibly considering getting your own custom tee or purchasing a Retro Rogues Live t-shirt and supporting the show. We would greatly appreciate that. But you can check that all out at kirbytees.com. That's www.kirbyts.com. But enough about that. I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks hopefully watching or listening at home some of the fun things that you have worked on as a creative professional.
Yes, everybody. My name is Eric Alexander. I also go by Bass God 14. That's Bass God 14, not Bass God 14. That's Bass God 14, like a bass guitar. And I am the chief financial officer of a company called Bad Bob Productions. That is one of the co-sponsors of this show, along with Kirby Tees, which is actually Dave's company. We actually like to say that we have sold out to ourselves. So please make sure that you check out Kirby Tees, because that is the official official merchandiser, if you will, of Retro Rogues Live. There's shirts available there, and also shirts for other things that Dave has done, and even custom orders and things like that. In addition to that, of course, Bad Bob Productions, that's my company, a small film company in Arizona. And one of our new projects that is out right now that we're still dealing with is Staycation, which we are producing along with Russ Emanuel, who's our director, and several other folks. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit more right after this kind of special message. So Dave and I have never really done this before. We've always said we want to keep this show completely non-political as possible. The only times we really get into politics is like we will talk about things like trademark law, copyright law. Like recently, we were talking about that in the budget that was coming out. That we had some concerns about some of the pork that was being put into that bill that included trademark law and copyright law and things that we were really kind of worried about and might possibly affect our show and things like that. So we normally just completely steer away from politics. But Dave and I decided that tonight we would say a statement of solidarity, that we do condemn violence from all sides. Things are getting out of control out there. We don't know if our stream is being suppressed, because that's been happening constantly because of all the politics. I think live streams are being suppressed in general, just because of everything that's going on, and because Facebook and YouTube are trying to regulate things. Twitter as well. They're trying to control things, control the narrative. It's kind of crazy right now. But we did want to say that all forms of violence, regardless of your political affiliation, your political side, should be condemned. And Dave, did you want to say anything more about that?
No, I just agree with what you said. I mean, violence in any form, it's not going to help. It's just not going to help. And I don't have, like Eric said, this show is not meant to be a political show to begin with. This is a pop culture. This is supposed to be a fun show. So, I don't condone violence in any form. I've talked before about my martial arts background and the fact that I was an Aikido practitioner. I believe that there's other ways to resolve your differences or disagreements with people besides violence. So, no, I'm totally against violence, and I don't feel like that's what we should be doing right now. And I disagree with you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And again, like you said, we don't like try to be too preachy or political on the show, but I feel like when the U.S. Capitol gets breached, something should be said. You know what I mean? There's a line, right? And at that point, it's like you got to say something. You can't just ignore that. But that is not going to be the main topic of our show. One thing that I put out on our Twitter was the fact that Area 51 is actually trending right now, because people are saying, well, if it's that easy to get in the Capitol, maybe we should be looking at this Area 51 raid again. And that's kind of also leads to a plug of our spinoff show, which is the Retro Rogues Mysteries, which is available on Retro Rogues Live. That's the YouTube channel that it's available on, in addition to our Facebook our Facebook group as well. And who knows, Dave? Maybe in a future episode, we're going to have to revisit that now that people are talking about an Area 51 raid again.
Yeah, we'll have to definitely talk about that, and we have lots of episodes that are, in production. We're trying to get together kind of like an actual season of episodes. So we're going to start releasing those again very soon. Those shows are intended to be different. We edit them; they're pre-recorded. They're supposed to be a little bit more polished and nice, as opposed to a live show where anything can happen, within reason.
In one of the episodes we have in the can that hasn't been released yet, it's the topic of disclosure in the Galactic Federation.
That's true. And that was an interesting episode. I think people will enjoy that.
So if any of you saw that Area 51 thing, and that's the reason you're here, check out our other show, the Retro Rogues Mysteries, which is on Retro Rogues Live. That's a YouTube channel. And check it out. By the way, if you happen to have the link, Dave, make sure you go ahead and share it out there on the chat so we can kind of promote that a little bit as well. And then Jane is in the house. She does say, "Hey guys," and hello, Jane. We hope that you're doing well and safe.
Yeah, hi, Mom.
Dave, I think at this point you should just say, "Hey," so we got to act like Jane is just like another fan. You know what I mean? So it's that image thing, right?
I always say hi, Mom. It doesn't matter. I don't care if people know it's my mom. I'm trying to pull up the Retro Rogues Live show on YouTube here so that we can push people over there in that direction. So we'll copy this, and I've got my second screen up, so my cursor's going all over the place. Hold on, let me get back over here.
Jane said she is doing good, thanks. And we're glad to hear that, Jane. Very glad to hear that. All right, so we got the links up there. So everybody, that's not spam. That's the other YouTube channel. Basically, that's for the mystery show, the spin-off show, which I think only one episode is available on there right now. There is another episode, I think, that's still on my channel, which is the Base God 14 channel, because the Retro Rogues Live show channel wasn't quite set yet. So, and we still got to tweak this branding thing. Obviously, Dave and I, we've had some issues with that, but we're gonna fix that. We'll get it going, right?
Yeah, this is all a bit of a work in progress. I mean, this whole thing started off as, what was it? In the Studio Retro Retrospective, which was a show that a friend, the Janimal, and I threw together like midnight after coming back from a live screen. Let's just do a YouTube show, and it's grown and evolved and moved way beyond that at this point. But initially, it was just sort of this silly little thing, and I kept changing the name. We kept having fun with it. So a lot of the confused branding is actually on me, because we just keep trying to reinvent the wheel every time we do something instead of trying to.
YouTube doesn't make it easy to rebrand. Like if I understand it right, in order for you to have like a / whatever you want, as opposed like you can see our link, like it's got all these weird numbers and stuff, and it should be like / Retro Rogues Live or / Retro Rogues, right?
Yeah.
I think you have to have at least like 100 subscribers before you're allowed to do that. So it's kind of crazy, and we've had all sorts of problems with our live stream. That's one thing what's ironic about the Retro Rogues Live channel is it's not going to be live. We're going to experiment with the only pre-recorded show or clips. We can put clips on there as well. So we're going to experiment with that to see, because we feel like we're really getting suppressed, particularly by YouTube. Like YouTube is killing us right now as far as just suppressing our live streams. It's just not getting any impressions or anything like that. So it's one thing, obviously, if we got a ton of impressions and nobody's clicking and nobody's viewing, but when your impressions are like nothing, you know that the algorithm is killing you and nobody's even having a chance to see this. So we're going to keep working on that. Well, one thing that leads into is, like we've talked about, we need to say more like and subscribe, right? Like, subscribe, and share, so please do that. Please do the likes. And actually, I'm also cool with dislikes. Any comments you have, if you don't like the show, tell us what you don't like. We'll try to improve it, right? We're not going to kowtow to everybody, but positive, constructive feedback, even if it's negative, sometimes is what you need to make your channel better, right?
That's very true. Very true.
We got a wave from Brandon Scott, by the way. Good to see you, Brandon.
Hello. I'm waving, but you can't see me. Yeah, I don't have the camera on tonight because I was explaining to Eric. I'm getting ready to actually sell a large portion of my comic book collection, and to pay for some things I need to pay for, do some things I want to do, and so I've been going through, and the studio is a complete and utter wreck. Between that and still doing orders for Kirby tees, it's a disaster in here. So that's part of the reason the camera's not on. Plus, I need a haircut and I need to shave, and
And yet, Dave was on camera with me for a little bit, showing me some of these comics, and his place looks much better than mine. But his is a wreck.
Yeah. Anyhow.
So, and I know I need to do something about my background, by the way, because I have a lot of cool collectibles, and there's a few over here, and you can't even really see them because you can see the pictures of my kids a little bit better than anything. But I have a lot of pretty cool collectibles, and I've mentioned this several times. A lot of them are in boxes in my closet, which just kills me.
Well, and we're going to be running long on time, so I should probably just get on with it. Sorry. I was going to turn the camera on for half a second and show off a couple of these books I found in my collection because I'm still kind of shocked at what I found. But
we've talked about a project possibly that you're going to be doing, which I think will be exciting. Maybe we can just tease people with that as far as what you're going to be doing with your comic book collection.
Yeah, I've been researching how to clean and press books, and I talked before, on the show, that I was going to start getting my collection, trying to cull it down. And what I want to do is I want to CGC grade, the books I intend to keep, and then cull my collection down a lot. And but part of that process, and as far as selling the books, is I want to press them and learn how to clean them so that they can look the best they possibly can. One, before they get graded, and then number two, before hopefully they wind up in someone else's collection.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to do. I was talking to Eric about it, as I learn this process, creating some, short YouTube videos, and people can kind of follow along with me as I learn how to actually, do this process and get some of these books ready. And then I'll probably I will be showing off the books before I send them off to get graded. And it's ironic, two of the most valuable books I have to get graded are actually books I worked on. That's a weird feeling. So that's a really weird feeling. But we'll be hopefully we'll be doing that here on the show eventually, getting into more of that kind of collecting kind of stuff. And I'm just enjoying getting back into my collection. It's been something that's fun for me, and I kind of forgotten how much I enjoy it, and it's made it kind of fun and exciting for me. And I've been getting a couple of books I'd purchased into the studio, and those books are really cool, and excited to have those. And should be fun. But we'll hopefully, in the episodes to come, we'll talk about it a little bit more. We'll get into the process, and I'll actually show off some of the books. And then sometimes I might ask the viewers, ask you guys out there in the Rogues Gallery, hey, if you had to pick between getting this book graded or this book graded next, which would you pick? And then based on what you all want to see, those will probably be the books I submit. So that'll be a fun thing to do.
Yeah, I've never had anything graded, so I think that'd be fun to participate in that with you, because I do have some decent comics out there, and I haven't even looked into their value in a long time, and so it'd be interesting to even kind of get into that again. So I'm also looking forward to the cleaning. I've told you that I'm looking forward to that, because I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that you could clean comic books. Now, I do have one more plug that I have to put out there for my company, for Bad Bob Productions. I've been talking about this quite a bit, but it's still ongoing, and I want to make sure that I give it as much press, if you will, as I possibly can. And I'm talking about the Staycation Indiegogo campaign. So for those that don't know, this is a film that I worked on actually in Hollywood, in Burbank, at a real studio in the middle of COVID with all the regulations. We had the director of this film, Russ Emanuel, on a previous episode talking about the campaign, talking about his background. And this film is actually related to a film that Dave worked on with Russ Emanuel, the director, called Routine. They actually take place in the same universe. Routine is a micro short about 5 minutes long that Dave worked on. He actually did some artwork that actually is really interesting, because it actually kind of makes Staycation into a fun kind of experimental film that was made in the middle of COVID, and has some wonderful art from Dave. So this is in the same universe, and the Staycation approach is kind of unique. In fact, I don't know if I've heard this before, but basically what we have filmed is going to become a short film. And it's actually going to represent about 25% of a feature film. So basically, a part of the film is going to kind of be available probably at film festivals and things like that. I don't think we're going to be, necessarily streaming it or anything like that, because eventually the idea is to get additional interest, additional funding, so that we can do a full feature film. And what's interesting is we have gotten past our goal. This was for the post-production costs, and also because we had some cost overruns as a result of COVID. And so the goal was $20,000. It's now up to $22,932, which is awesome, with 24 days left. Like I said, everybody likes to be part of a winning team. And if you join our crowdfunder, you are now part of our winning team. And I did want to mention a couple perks that I thought were really interesting. First of all, you can get on IMDb pretty cheap, but you can get a copy of the film for $11. That's a digital download. And then you can get basically on IMDb for like $20. A lot of people want to be on IMDb because they want to get into the industry. So that's always a really great thing to have. And it's not that easy if you don't sort of have the in, which our director, Russ Emanuel, does. And then they've got like t-shirts for $30. They've got the Routine prequel. This is the film that Dave worked on with Russ. That's part of the Staycation universe. $51. You get a digital download of Routine. And then one of the ones I think is one of the best ones is the DVD limited edition. So if you do the DVD limited edition, that's $57, and you do get the digital download of Routine, as long as a bunch of the other perks that are underneath it. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was that the previous episode, I didn't know whether we were going with, what do you call them? The stretch goals. I didn't know if we were going to be doing any of that. I'd heard some talk from Russ that we were, and I wasn't sure. Well, we are doing stretch goals. So there is a stretch goal available already. I can't find it, unfortunately. I don't know where it went. Maybe it's in the description here. Here we go. Stretch goal. So we've got some stretch goals right now. I think the first one, it looks like, is at 30,000. Well, no, that's number 2. What's the first stretch goal? But we do have some stretch goals. Unfortunately, I'm having trouble finding them. But the stretch goal number 2 is at 30,000. I know there's another one at 25,000. And it says full behind the scenes video. So you'll get a full behind the scenes video of all the lead actors. It'll be sent to anybody who contributes over $111. If you contributed less, you can actually do the difference, and then you'll get that stretch goal. And that's actually kind of near and dear to me. It's actually related to stretch goal number 1. Stretch goal number 1 is actually the footage of the zombie, sort of the makeup transformation of one of our sort of zombie monsters or whatever. Basically, my partner, Rob McVeigh, recorded that entire process. It's actually one of the main things Bad Bob Productions did on set was the BTS. We did a lot of the behind the scenes, virtually all of it, except for some of the stills. That's one of our stretch goals, so please check it out. I'm going to go ahead and share the link. This is the link right there. And actually, let me go ahead and see if I can go ahead and share it also in the chat. But hey, like I said, folks, everybody likes to be part of a winning team, and this is a successful crowdfunder. You know, if you're interested in getting in sort of the business or anything like that, check this out. And even if you're just interested in the process, or just if you like cool entertainment, you know what I mean? This is sort of like basically going to be kind of like a horror movie. It plays with all the events of COVID a little bit. The tagline is, no vacation from staycation. It's a pandemic horror film with Star Trek actors. And we have Olivia Dabo in it, Sean Kenny, Tracy Coco, and several other name actors in this project.
Yeah, very cool. And yeah, again, I would encourage people, check it out, find a perk, that works. Please help support the campaign. Support independent, creative, people. That's what we're doing here. This is an independent, channel. I've been an independent comic artist for years and years and years, way before I ever started working for DC. As a matter of fact, when Eric and I originally met, I was doing a series called Bushy Tales. I've talked about here on the show before. It was a totally independent series. The book before that I was known for, Star Gods, was an independent creator-owned series. So support independent artists, support independent creative people, and let's continue to usher fun, new, creative works out there into the world.
And I would really like to see some of these YouTubers do more of that too. And I obviously I don't know what our reach is, but it's like it does get frustrating sometimes because it seems like so many YouTubers have built their platform just based on complaining about sort of mainstream big franchises. And I get it; it works. It's a successful formula for a lot of people, but it's like every once in a while, wouldn't it be nice to just be kind of like help somebody out, help out the little guy, help out the independents? Because you're complaining about storytelling, you're complaining about all this stuff. It's like, well, why don't you talk to somebody that's trying to actually do something, right? And trying to actually create something as opposed to just regurgitating all these different franchises like we're going to be doing tonight because we're regurgitating a big franchise as well. But we legitimately, have an interest in this, and that's why we're doing it. It's not necessarily a calculated move. And it looks like Hollywood Jackson is in the house. He says, sweet. I hope that's in regards to the crowdfunder that we did. We appreciate that, Hollywood Jackson. And even though Dave and I didn't have a chance to really talk about it off camera yet, I do know that there might be something in the works between all of us. So I'll just let you know that, Hollywood Jackson. Dave and I haven't had a chance to talk about it, but I am excited about the prospect, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about it more later.
Yes, most definitely. I sent that to Eric. I was pretty blown away by what Hollywood Jackson sent to me. It was really awesome. Yeah, we are going to be talking about some already established entertainment that we don't directly create for per se, but we do create a lot of our own stuff too. So it's sort of a venue or avenue into other things. And I thought this would be interesting. I'm not going to be on camera a lot tonight because I don't want to be, because like I said, I feel like I'm a wreck. But I did think this would be kind of interesting because we're going to be talking about Cobra Kai tonight. A lot of people may not realize, but Karate Kid, there's always in these Karate Kid movies and stuff, there's always a little byline about DC Comics in there. And a lot of people have never even seen what Karate Kid in the comic book form actually looked like. But that's Karate Kid right there in the comic books. And he right here, this Brave and the Bold, this is teaming up Batman and the Karate Kid. This is an actual comic book. But for those of you who are fans of Karate Kid but who've never actually seen him before, this is what he looked like in the comic books, folks. Now, this
I am
is
one
not
of those people, Dave. I have always wondered about that since I first saw the original Karate Kid in the movie theater. I've always wondered about the DC version of Karate Kid, because I know it obviously came before the movie that we all love so much, right? And I think I actually did see one of the comics at a comic book store one time, but that's about as close as I got to it. I know Batman wasn't in it, but that's pretty neat. That's some real comic book history, and that totally relates to what we're going to talk about tonight. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it does. And I thought this would be fun. Again, this is not the Daniel LaRusso Karate Kid. You know what I mean? This is a character from the Legion of Superheroes timeline who's actually from the future, but he's kind of like Iron Fist. He's forged himself into such a weapon that he can punch through steel and stuff like that. But I just thought this would be interesting because, like I said, I've been going through my collection, and I thought, some people probably, they talk about Karate Kid, they see that thing in there, and they've probably never even seen what the Karate Kid in the comic books, actually even looked like. But there you go. There's what his logo, back in the day looked like, and there's the actual Karate Kid right there, actually teamed up with Batman. So there you go. For those of you,
that's an interesting story to be told as well. You know what I mean? And maybe one of these days we can get into a little bit more, because I remember even as a kid, because I was not familiar with the comic book at all, I was just like, I remember seeing the credit as a kid and being like, I don't remember any Karate Kid comic. And like I said, I have a vague notion that maybe I saw one in a comic book store or something like that, but I know nothing about the character. So maybe that's something we can get into, in a future broadcast.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I have a lot of the original Karate Kid comics actually in a box around here I still need to get to. So there are more than just that one. That's just the one I came across as I was going through my Brave and the Bold books the other night. So, and I thought, I'm going to leave this out. So, if we want to bring it up, I thought it would be fun for people who are Karate Kid fans who have seen that and always wonder, well, what is that all about? Well, there you go. That's what
Well, it
it's all
totally
about.
relates to our main topic tonight, our
Yep.
top review, which is Cobra Kai, Season 3, Part 1, meaning episodes 1 through 5. I know there's a lot of information on that ticker, we're talking about, specifically, we're going to review episodes 1 through 5 for Season 3. And I'm not sure how this is going to go, honestly, because it seems like I've mentioned this. I mentioned this in our last broadcast. Netflix shows are a little bit problematic to review because of the nature of how they release their shows. Specifically, it doesn't matter with the movie; they can release the movie any way they want, right? It doesn't really matter. But the shows are meant to be binge watched, and of course, Netflix kind of made that term a thing. And I don't know how I feel about that. As a reviewer, I'll tell you, I think it's going to be challenging for us tonight. Because a lot of you probably want to talk about the end of the season. I know I do, because I binge watched the whole thing. And you know what? My intention was just to watch the first 5 episodes so I wouldn't have the ending in my head. And I didn't do it. I binge watched just like, so many other hardcore fans because I was riveted and I just kept going. But we're going to try to do specifically like sort of deep dive on episodes 1 through 5. And then if you guys out there, like, you do want to talk about the end, especially after we're done with the season episode 5 review, you're more than welcome to do it, because we understand so many of you have already watched the entire show.
Yeah, and that was kind of the trick too. I ended up watching the whole thing as well, even though we were going to discuss the first 5. But we can start here at the top without getting into spoilers. And what I've done is I've actually got a season 3 episode guide, and we're just going to go through each episode
Awesome.
and kind of take them in order and try to keep it without too much rambling, unless people in the Rogues Gallery want to obviously weigh in. So we hopefully keep our time down. But I will say we're going to start.
And it's funny because what I did was, in order to refresh my memory, I went through the timeline of the different episodes and I took actual notes. I rarely take notes for the show, actually. I need to do it more honestly. I actually took notes, and I've got several pages of notes here. And I realized it's funny because, like for me, I actually do want to get to the end, because it's like there's so much there that I want to talk about and speculate. That's going to be for our next episode, right? So we have part 2 coming up next week. We'll definitely get into that speculation and what the implications are of season 3. But I realized doing that, there's so much that goes on in each episode. It's almost all like, I don't know if we can get through all this. You know what I mean? Because there's so much that happens in every single episode of Cobra Kai.
Very true. But we're going to go ahead. We're going to start off. Let's just do our initial impressions. I think we can just go ahead and do our initial impressions, for kind of like this season 3 as a total, like as a whole here, just the top. And then we'll do that again for next episode, but we won't wax poetic quite so much about it. But let's start off with just our initial impressions for the season as a whole, no spoilers. And then after that, then we can get into the nitty gritty, and we'll start going through the episodes one by one and break it down. So, Eric, why don't you start? What was your initial impression, overall impression of season 3 of Cobra Kai, avoiding spoilers?
That's tough for the whole season, especially since we're doing episodes 1 through 5 right now. So I'm going to kind of take it back a little bit. Because we are specifically talking about episodes 1 through 5. Episode 1 through 5 sets up a lot of stuff that's going to be paid off in the second part. It's really interesting that they do that, because Cobra Kai doesn't have a lot of episodes. For whatever reason, Netflix has decided on this format where they're basically, like, their big shows are 10 episodes per season. Because we were just talking about the fact that some of these shows, there's only 6 episodes. That's how stingy Netflix is sometimes with their shows, which is kind of interesting and weird, But there's so much basically in the first part of the season, the specific parts that we're going to be deep diving, that sets up the great payoffs in the second part. And honestly, like with the first half, there were a lot of things that I was feeling like this isn't really working that well. I don't know how I feel about this. And it felt like a lot of that stuff went away, which is good. Like, I'll talk about one specific thing in one of the episodes that's set up that I thought was just not working very well. And I think they jettisoned it. So I kind of like the fact that Cobra Kai, the producers of Cobra Kai are willing to play around with a lot of ideas. And here's one revelation. Here's one big revelation I had. In season 2, I felt was very different from season 1, and I did feel season 1 was superior to season 2. But I started to realize, like, why am I having a problem here? What is sort of the disconnect? And I realized part of the problem, of course, is Johnny. There's sort of a difference with Johnny from season 1 to season 2. And, you know, at the end of season 1, Johnny is kind of like in a weird place, but he's still in a place of strength and a place of triumph, even though, you know, his son has, you know, had to fight, you know, his star pupil, and they've set that all up. He's still kind of a winner. And then, of course, we get the reveal of Kreese, which was like, oh, this is fucking awesome. Kreese is back. You know what I mean? And it gave so much anticipation for season 2. And I don't know if season 2 completely lived up to the hype, at least in my mind, because it has great stuff. To me, season 2 is all about the last episode. The last episode is like the one that everybody's talking about. It's the highest rated, you know, in terms of fandom and stuff like that. Everybody was about that. And I realized, it's like, what is going on now that I'm watching season 3 and I'm feeling this more and I'm feeling this kind of weird. And I realized what it is that we talked about this before. Cobra Kai kind of defies genre. Like, it's listed as like an action comedy drama. Okay. And I suddenly realized what that actually is. It's a soap opera. That's what Cobra Kai is. It's a soap opera. And it was reinforced more to me as I was preparing for the episode. There's so many things that go on in each episode. It's so like unrealistic and crazy. And you suddenly realize they've changed their genre. This is not like an action movie anymore or whatever, like whatever you might call Karate Kid, an action drama maybe is what you would call the original Karate Kid movies. I think that would fit the best, action drama. And it's like they've added so many other elements. It's become a soap opera, and I've realized I like it. You know, I'm kind of addicted to the soap opera.
Well, here's an interesting thing. I had this conversation with someone actually today, not Eric, but someone else. And I talked about how it's weird that some people don't seem to understand. Like, I love comic books, but comic books, for the most part, are melodrama. You know, they are kind of like soap opera for nerds, is, you know, the way I was describing it. And, you know, don't anyone take any offense to that, but it's kind of true. You know, it's like in between, you know, it's like a soap opera is sort of like a dramatic, you know, tense moment between two characters, and in the background, the overarching story is someone's company's in trouble, right? Well, in a comic book, it's kind of the same thing. The only difference is the city's in trouble, you know, and these two characters have a brief dramatic moment about something that happened in their civilian identities or what have you. And that's sort of what's in between, you know, the slugfest. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how this stuff works. And, you know, someone who does this incredibly well, you know what I mean? It can carry you and get you excited and want you to read more. And one that does it poorly, when you finish, you know, you're done. You know, that's the difference. You know, but it is all melodrama at the end of the day.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. And you're right, because it's always kind of continuous. And generally in the comics, unless it's like a mini series, right, which is just a complete story that's done, and you know, sometimes it can be as short as two issues, usually like 4, right? The mini series that I used to get. But if it's part of the ongoing series, like just say Batman, you know, the mainstream Batman comic book, it's ongoing, and typically they always end on cliffhangers, much like Cobra Kai does.
Exactly. It's very much the same kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
And so, well, here's my high take of season 3. I really liked it. I think season 1 is still probably the best for me. Because I feel like it was a little bit more focused on the story. Because by the time we get to season 3, we have a lot of characters to catch up with.
A lot. Yeah, there's a lot going on.
It's interesting how a lot of characters kind of get dropped, or they can't even find a way to kind of fit them in.
Oh, that's a great point. But I think more so for, unfortunately, part 2. But I think that's a great point. A lot of these characters that come back are almost criminally underused.
Yeah, and so I wanted to say, so with, again, not getting into spoilers, my overall take with Cobra Kai season 3, I really liked it, I guess that's the weird thing, is I know a lot of people who are not watching Cobra Kai, and I'm always kind of stunned at that, because I feel like that no matter what you're kind of into, if you give it a shot, I think you'll really enjoy Cobra Kai a lot. And I love this show. This was my number one, thing of 2020. And I really, really enjoyed season 3. I had a lot of fun with it. But I can't get too more into specifics until we actually start breaking down the episodes and actually get into some spoiler talk. But my overall take is Cobra Kai is awesome. Season 3 was really good. You can watch it on Netflix. So if you have Netflix, I don't know why you haven't watched it or why you didn't want to watch it. But, definitely if you're a kid of the 80s, again, if you like melodrama, if you like action, like if you're looking for something fun and entertaining to watch, I think if you give Cobra Kai a shot, you'll enjoy it. So that's my hot take for season 3.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. All right,
Cool.
let's get into our deep dive here, and let's get into
All right. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go episode by episode. I'm going to try and keep my observations succinct and short because basically we all know I have a tendency to run off at the mouth, and we don't want to go too long tonight. So, basically season 3, the first episode, the title is Aftermath. It was, of course, is aptly named. And this basic summary is Miguel is fighting for his life. Robbie is missing, and Daniel and Johnny's reputations are in tatters as the community reacts to the brawl. Now, this episode takes place a couple weeks after the season 2 finale. Everyone's kind of taken a hit, reputation-wise and whatever, for what happened at the end, the school brawl, which is interesting because I knew they'd have to touch on it, but I was curious to see how they were going to touch on it. Because I remember watching an episode going, this is insane. Like how in the world is this going to be okay after they do all this? Because these kids are trying to kill each other, So I was really curious to see how they were going to handle this, at the top of season 3. And I thought their solution was interesting. The show likes to not do what you expect and kind of flip things on its head, a lot of times. And I just thought it was an interesting way that they kind of approach this. I guess for me, the big high point is, going to be the fact that we see basically that Daniel and Johnny are going to have to work together. It doesn't go very well, but they kind of realize they're going to have to work together if they're going to get things back on track, because their rivalry has really caused a lot of this. I mean, Kreese hasn't done anybody any favors, but their rivalry is really just, this whole thing has just got completely out of control. And I thought it was really cool. So that's going to be my kind of points of the first episode. I thought it was interesting to see Johnny and Daniel.
I have to say, Dave, I don't think we're quite at that point in this episode where Daniel and
oh, that's right, that's episode
Johnny
2.
are really gonna team up yet. I think you kind of jumped a little bit in terms of the narrative, because they're really not at that point. You know what I mean? In this episode, I did like I said, I did some notes, so I've got sort of like a highlight breakdown. One of the things that's tough, even when you're taking notes, is they usually have like 3 or 4 different stories going on in each episode, which is crazy when you think about that, because this is a 30-minute drama, right? Which is a format that actually went away, right? This used to be a thing, and the 30-minute drama format has been gone for a long time. And so this is a 30-minute drama, or as I would say, even a 30-minute soap opera. And a lot of stuff is going on. There's usually like 3 or 4 different story beats going on at the same time. And what they do is they shift back and forth between the different stories. So it can get confusing, and it's a little tough sometimes to review because each story thread is happening at different times. So the thing I wanted to start out with is, we have the scene, obviously, of Miguel. He's obviously still in a coma. He's dreaming about defending his title at the All Valley, which is kind of an analogy for him fighting for his survival, right? But they have this interesting scene afterwards where we catch up with Johnny, and Johnny basically has degenerated kind of again, and he's just sitting in a bar, and he gets into an argument with the bartender over nothing, the famous Coors Banquet. And by the way, this is my tradition when reviewing Cobra Kai. I try not to show whatever I'm drinking, and usually, by the way, it is non-alcoholic. You may think otherwise, but usually it's non-alcoholic when I'm on the air. And I usually turn the camera off if I take a swig of my drink or whatever. See, I got a water bottle here too. But for Cobra Kai, I always got to do the Coors Banquet. That's my tradition. So cheers, everybody. Cobra Kai will never die. But apparently the Coors Banquet thing is, because I think that's the last reference to Coors Banquet. Basically, Johnny gets kicked out of a bar because they gave him Coors Light and he wanted Coors Banquet. So they kick him out of the bar. And then he gets his ass kicked by these two guys in the parking lot, which I was really kind of taken aback by that because, I want Johnny to be a badass.
Well, and you're right. I did actually skip ahead to the two of them teaming up. So now what I thought was interesting too about this episode, and tell me if I'm wrong, but we do kind of get where Samantha is going through some stuff as well, where she's definitely not only scarred physically, but scarred mentally, from her battle with Tori. And that's definitely taking a big toll on her.
And also, Aisha's gone. That's a big thing too, that a lot of people, I feel like not a lot of people are talking about that. So Aisha was written out of this season completely, which is really kind of crazy to me because she was an important character. But I feel like why the producers did that is because they needed to isolate Sam more at the beginning. Think that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it does because Sam doesn't have anyone in her corner. Definitely the first couple of episodes. I mean, she's pretty much just kind of all off on her own, and pretty lost. And I'll just say right here, right now, I feel like Samantha has, for me, the most intriguing arc over this season. I enjoyed seeing everything. I just enjoyed seeing everything that she was going through.
And it didn't really follow your prediction. That's one thing that I want to call out a little bit because I'll be honest with you, I wasn't that happy with your prediction as far as what you thought was going to happen with Sam and this parallel between I think Johnny and Miyagi and all that kind of stuff. It didn't turn out that way. They went with a completely different direction, which was interesting. I don't know how I feel about it, honestly, but they didn't go in the direction that you kind of were thinking they were going to go.
And it was interesting, too, because they kind of played with people's theories and expectations, which is interesting. And I wonder how much of that was intentional because they even had a scene because a lot of people have been speculating that Allie would come back and she would do the surgery that was going to help out Miguel. And then there was actually a moment where there was a blonde-haired doctor.
They teased that. They teased that, right? Yeah. And that was a big moment. And that was definitely one of the moments I wanted to call out. There is a moment, and I believe it is in this episode, in the first episode, where they're talking about getting a surgeon from like out of state, like somebody that's like a specialist. And there were so many fan theories that thought the way Allie was going to come into season 3 was that she was, because she's a doctor, right? Is that she was going to be the one that does Miguel's surgery. And they did this great tease, and it totally has to be called out. I'm totally with you, Dave, where you see this blonde woman, right? You only see the back of her, and you're totally expecting like she's going to turn around and it's Allie, right? Allie with an I, right? And it's not. But I think it's funny because I feel like that might have been a little bit of a shout out to the fans. What do you think, Dave?
I think it was both. I think it was sort of like, a wink and a nod, but at the same point too, it was also the producers and the writers going, we're not just going to do what you say we're going to do.
But they kind of did. I like that. I would love to talk to them, you know what I mean? And ask them if that's what that was. Like, did they just come up with that on their own, or was that kind of a nod and a wink to all the Cobra Kai fans that made that theory? Because even I thought that was an interesting theory.
Yeah. And a lot of my theories were wrong, but Eric, some of my theories were very, very right too, as usual. As usual. Even though I was skipping ahead in the show,
I did want to mention also we do get the reintroduction of Sam's friend, the very prissy blonde girl. She comes back this season, and I'm going to just say it. She's a great example of like, why'd you bring her back? Because they don't do a lot with her.
Well, and I think she was meant to be there for what the stuff that they were doing, Dimitri. But we'll get there. So are we good to move on to the next episode?
Well, there is a couple. There's also Daniel's cousin comes back because he was gone from season 2, right? So Daniel's cousin is back at LaRusso Auto. That character returns. We also have this plot beginning where Daniel is actually the one initially looking for Robbie, right? Because Robbie is still on the run, and Daniel decides that he's going to go looking for him. And then, of course, the big takeaway at the end is Miguel wakes up.
Right. That's a big moment. Um, yeah.
Oh, and then the dedication. We have to mention the dedication
Oh yeah.
to the original Cobra Kai at the end. I thought that was very classy.
Yeah, it was very cool. Very cool.
Something the Mandalorian did not do for Jeremy Bulloch, by the way. Just saying.
That's true. So we get into the second episode, which is Nature versus Nurture. The brief synopsis says Daniel and Johnny team up to find Robbie. Miguel's future is uncertain. Kreese tries to bring Tori back to Cobra Kai. So this is an interesting episode on a lot of fronts.
Oh, big.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I already kind of, I guess, jumped ahead. The big thing I enjoyed in this one was watching Daniel and Johnny kind of try to work together, which actually was something that they had kind of foreshadowed a little bit in actually season one. In that episode where the two of them are kind of going down memory lane, essentially, and you begin to see that they have more in common than they don't. That's where they reminisce about Allie in the bar, and that's kind of like a big thing in season one. I really love that episode.
I like the kind of interesting line also because you remember Johnny had thrown his phone away, right? And we had that image of Allie had friended him on Facebook, but he had thrown his phone away. And it's Daniel that has to mention to Johnny, is like, well, you still have your Facebook on your computer, right? You know, I mean, you still can access it on your computer. And you can see Johnny, you know, being like, is that a thing? You know what I mean? Like, can you access Facebook on your laptop? So I thought that was a little bit fun.
And in the previous episode, Johnny actually they do establish this because Johnny brings a bunch of stuff back to that same pawn guy, and he's trying to pawn stuff back to the guy that he got from him last time. And it turns out that the reason Johnny hasn't been on his laptop is because the battery's gone dead, and he doesn't realize he can just plug it in to recharge the battery. And so, yeah, that's kind of interesting how they kind of reintroduce even, you know, non-terribly important things, you know what I mean? So that we know that they're going to be important
but
later
by the
on.
way, Dave, you skipped episode 3 again, just so you know. That's in episode 3. You skipped again. Yeah, that's in episode 3. The pawn thing. I have my notes right here, so
okay. I thought that was earlier. Okay. All right. Well, anyhow, sorry.
Nope. I watched the buddy cop thing. The buddy cop thing I thought was really interesting. It shows you that this is a soap opera, and it shows you that it does defy a genre because Daniel and Johnny essentially do a little buddy cop thing in this episode.
Right. And now, tell me if I'm wrong, but this is the episode where we begin to get the flashbacks with Kreese, right?
Yes, and that's the biggest thing to me. That's why I think this episode is so interesting because it really changes things up. We have seen some very brief flashbacks here and there in Cobra Kai before that are very, very brief. Like the ones I remember is they showed Mr. Miyagi making his garden, and then they showed one of Sam when she was a little girl, being taught by Daniel in Miyagi, the original Miyagi-Do, where he actually was just doing family karate, which I think is kind of cool because that's what Miyagi always said Miyagi-Do was, right? Family karate. And so this time we get a really intricate flashback. And this is a direction I did not think the show would go. I really didn't think they were going to go this way. But there's things that Martin Kove, that this is the actor who plays Kreese, has said that should have made me realize they were going to do this. So they get into Kreese's backstory. In fact, I would actually go so far as to say season 3, more than anything, is really about Kreese. And I love it. I think it's amazing. I love this character. I love the actor. I love his attitude. And it's really interesting that they do this flashback of Kreese. And once again, they flip the script. Now, I don't know if I totally agree with this because it seems every time they flip the script, they do it exactly the same way. And maybe I'm splitting hairs because I'm thinking like maybe they should have done this a little bit different way. But essentially, long story short, is Kreese was bullied as a young man. He was working in a diner. Apparently, his mom had killed himself. And there's this great misdirection in the beginning of this episode where you think Kreese is pulling up actually in Miyagi's car. You caught that, right, Dave? Like it looks like he's pulling up in Miyagi's car. And he's got a Letterman jacket on. He's got his girlfriend. He's got his little toad that basically goes around, does whatever he says. And I thought that was Kreese. Did you think that was Kreese at first?
I did think that was Kreese at first, and in addition to that, what I thought was about to happen is I thought we were going to see they were going to somehow give us a callback actually to Miyagi, and because
they did give us a callback to Miyagi.
Well, let me finish. What I'm talking about is in the original Happy Days, Pat Morita actually played. I can't remember. I think he was like the cook or something at the diner? Yeah.
Arnold. Yeah. So
I totally thought we were going to get like that kind of a callback, and I was curious to see if they were going to actually suggest that at one point Miyagi was. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that would have been funny.
Yeah, I thought that's what
that would have been a little bit too much, but that would have been funny.
It would have been. It would have been too on the nose.
They merged Happy Days and Karate Kid.
Right. And so I thought that's kind of where we were going. So it was interesting that, they decided to play it the kind of the way it did, because it was the big shocker is that Kreese isn't the character you expect him to be. He's actually the busboy, and he's being bullied. It's interesting how they keep doing that. They keep showing us how hero, villain, this kind of the Rocky story idea, and how it all about at the end of the day is all about your perspective. That's what determines whether or not
you're a hero
or a villain of your own story.
The picture you chose for our backdrop here just expresses it really well, because we've got Johnny and Kreese in the middle and Daniel with these very stern looking faces and stuff. And that really does say a lot about the season, because it really now is about the three of them. You know what I mean? As much as I like the younger characters, obviously they have their stories. And I think you and I both have our favorites when it comes to the younger characters. It's undeniable that they are giving these legacy actors the star treatment, and they are really developing their characters.
Yeah, it's very interesting how they, and that's the thing. I'm always constantly surprised at what a great job this show does of, setting all these interesting ideas up and playing them all out. And I'm always surprised at the choices they decide to make. But it was interesting, what Kreese's backstory is. And in part of this too, they use this to kind of show us some things that's going on, because we see where Tori is too.
Right. And the situation get Tori back in this episode.
Right. And it's interesting too, because part of the reason we get Tori back is because Kreese, basically, it's weird because I don't know if you would necessarily consider what he did heroic per se, but basically there's this sleazy landlord guy.
Yeah. I think that the point is that they're trying to not make it so black and white. That I've heard that said actually from Ralph Macchio. Actually, in the Netflix after party, he specifically said that. Like, it was his perspective is in the original Karate Kid movie, it's like crystal clear who's bad and who's good, despite all the YouTubes and How I Met Your Mother and all the other kind of silly stuff out there. Come on, it's pretty clear. Johnny's the bad guy. Johnny's the bully, and Daniel is the victim who basically builds himself up through karate. In this series, they constantly challenge that, because they show you more to the story about these characters. And I thought it was a very interesting choice, because Tori does seem like a vicious character. In fact, she's even just as or more vicious in this season as she was last season. But with all that viciousness, they humanize her. And the same thing goes for Kreese. Kreese and Tori, in a lot of ways, seem like on a parallel path. On a parallel path with each other, because it's like, yeah, they're dicks, yeah, they're assholes, but there's a reason that they're dicks, and there's a reason they're assholes. And one of the things with Tori's character is that her mother is sick, and basically she's the one taking care of her, and she's also been arrested because she assaulted Sam.
Right, and it's interesting and that was the thing. I was curious to see how they were going to reintroduce Tori, because they kind of showed in such a way in the trailer that it almost makes it like people were saying she was in an underground fight club, and like all these crazy theories about what was going to be happening.
I think we actually get to that. I think that's episode 5. I think we finally get the payoff of that scene. So
right.
We'll get there.
But it's interesting because, kind of what your imagination thinks is going to happen. And then we see, kind of what's actually going on, because all these, most of these kids, they paid a price for that brawl that they were involved with.
And by the way, going back to that, you and I, when we had watched the trailer, we were doing speculation about the injuries that Johnny had, and I think we kind of thought maybe he'd gone back to fight Kreese or something like that. And it turned out he was just beat up by some guys in the parking lot.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because again, it subverts your expectations. It's not what you expect is going to happen.
It's not what you expect. Yeah, they do a good job with that, and putting it somewhere. Although, I kind of was a little upset because I want to see Johnny kick ass. You know what I mean? Like that's my thing. There is also another big moment with the buddy cop story where we actually see Daniel and Johnny team up.
Right. And that's a fun scene. That is
a fun scene because they kick ass. That's the kick ass I want to see. So Daniel and Johnny together, I guess in a way you see that Daniel and Johnny together would be unstoppable. Like they would just kick everybody's ass. They're like Jedi. You know what I mean? They're just way above everybody else. It's a fun scene to see the two of them kicking ass together. And then of course they almost start fighting each other at the end, which also was a really nice touch because they don't like each other.
It goes back to the idea, and we're going to get there. But remember, I predicted when we were talking about season 2, I talked about this concept that I felt like that they were the yin and they're the yin and the yang, that they are the opposites, and reality is maybe somewhere in the middle. You know what I mean? And that you need both.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
That's the thing in the second part of season 1. We'll get there. So, but also the other big thing, of course, in this episode is they really do give you a fairly complete backstory of Kreese. At least you think. That's what's kind of interesting too. Is you kind of think, well, now I got the whole Kreese story. Which, to sum it up really quickly, is, as we mentioned, Kreese was basically a busboy at a diner. His mother apparently had killed herself, which is pretty sad. And he was struggling. And basically he had this encounter with this bully that like did the whole tripping thing, which also that's a callback to Karate Kid directly, right? The guy trips him, right? Just like Johnny did to Daniel in the beach fight. And in this whole process, he meets an army recruiter, and this is what puts him on the path to join the military, which I thought was interesting. Then we get a follow-up scene where basically the bullies are abusing the girl that's with the jock type guy. And Kreese steps in. And we don't know anything about Kreese at this point as far as whether he knows anything, whether he's just a total wimp or whatever. But this is in the alley. This is not in the diner. And it's kind of interesting because in the diner, you kind of see it. It's like in the diner, the busboy really can't fight back because he might get fired, right? Now we got an alley brawl over this girl that Kreese doesn't really know. In fact, as far as Kreese knows, she's just part of the group that picks on him. But he steps in and he kicks ass, which I thought was really interesting because that actually puts some more questions into Kreese's background. He beats the jock and his friend. He beats him in this basically this street fight in an alleyway. And he gets the girl, just like Daniel. It's really interesting. So now it's like Kreese was almost exactly like Daniel, right? So he gets the girl, and this girl basically falls in love with him, but Kreese has decided to join the army, and the last we see of the Kreese flashback is he's going off to war with his sweetheart waiting for him, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting to get sort of that origin, at least is the first part of it anyway, that origin story for Kreese, because it's not something, in all honesty, I really thought that I wanted or was terribly curious about. Yeah, it's weird because, again, this goes back to the original Karate Kid movies. Kreese is such a good villain that I don't feel like I need to know anything more. Like, I'm totally okay for Kreese to just be the villain.
So you don't like the prequels of Star Wars? Because that's one of the things that's so compelling to me about Darth Vader is his backstory.
Well, no, yeah. Well, what the point I'm making is that I didn't realize or think I wanted Kreese's backstory, but it's very interesting once you actually get into it, and
did I lose you?
No, I'm still here. Can you hear me? Hello?
I had a hiccup on my side. I think that was just me.
Okay. No, all I was just going to say is that, it's just not something I really thought I wanted. I didn't really think I needed or wanted Kreese's backstory, but it's really interesting once you get into it and you see what it was that forged Kreese into the man that we know him to be, in the show. It's interesting because he's been through some stuff just like everybody else has been, you've been through some stuff and you don't really question
he even says that. I think that's what he says when he kicks their asses. the girl's kind of shocked, and he's all like, "Well, this isn't my first fight." You know what I mean? Like the guy's apparently been bullied, and it kind of seems like he was a street fighter. You know what I mean? That's what I get from that, is that he wasn't necessarily trained, and because we get into that later. But it brings a fascinating question, because he does kick ass. You know what I mean? And he beats up a big guy, who's his son, by the way. Did you know that that's actually his son? The guy
I did.
I think that's cool that the two of them got. Well, there was a different actor playing Kreese, but still, they got to work on the same project. That's very cool.
Yeah, for sure. I thought it was really cool.
And his son was an asshole, just like Kreese.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the reason when you see him, you immediately think it is Kreese, because there's enough of a resemblance there that you immediately make that connection.
It's his son.
It worked really well.
What's more perfect than that for misdirection to make you think that's Kreese? They cast his son. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool, actually. And also the actor that they got to play the young Kreese looks a lot like Martin Kove as well.
That's true. Very true.
Did a good job there. Good misdirection. I like that kind of misdirection. I appreciate it. And then we should mention also, the big takeaway from this episode is Tori does come back to Cobra Kai after Kreese, of all people, intervened with this sort of bully superintendent at her building that was basically looking like trying to get sex from her. You know what I mean? He basically goes to the guy and basically tells him, you fool with my girl and I'm going to kill you. You know what I mean? Which was a really kind of interesting moment. It makes it kind of feel like, wow, I'm starting to like Kreese. At least I did.
Well, and it ends too, because there's an interesting monologue too. I believe it's in the end of this episode, where Kreese talks about how, they're just going to assume that you're the bad guy. They're just going to assume that you're the villain, but they don't know your whole story. And it's interesting the way they end this episode, where Kreese is basically saying there's more to me than what you think. And maybe
by the way, it's almost like the writers are saying their pitch to you, isn't it? It's like, this is basically what the producers and writers of Cobra Kai, this is like their whole thing, right? Like, there's two sides to every story, right? Or three sides. We'll find out in part 3. I like that line, but that's I'm sorry, part 2. That's beyond episode 5. But it's like, I think it's almost like Kreese is speaking for the writers, you know what I mean? And basically telling you, hey, this is exactly what we're trying to do with this show. You know what I mean? So we're trying to show that even though Kreese is a sort of villainous character, there is a reason that he's that way. Tori's a villainous character, but there's a reason that she's that way. And seeing the two of them together, actually, I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was. It was interesting. And that's what I said. It's not that I didn't want Kreese's story. I didn't think I needed it. I didn't think I wanted it. But the further you get into it, it's really, really interesting. And especially, too, its connections to, Karate Kid 3. Because we're going to get the introduction of a character, and we're going to get kind of the backstory of another character I didn't think I was all that terribly interested in. And then when I realized, it's like, oh, well, that's what happened. That's interesting. It gives us more backstory actually for Karate Kid 3 of all things.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
they
cool.
definitely are doing what's called they're calling it now the Miyagi-verse.
Yeah.
They have respect for all of the Miyagi-verse. So that's interesting. So let's get into episode 3, Dave.
All right. Okay. So episode 3, the title is Now You're Gonna Pay. The synopsis base says Daniel's disgraced public image takes a toll on his sales, leading to a takeover offer. Johnny tries to raise money for Miguel's surgery. So I did skip ahead there. So this episode, I think we spend a little bit more time with Daniel on this one, and we begin to see a lot of the damage. Is this the episode where they find Robbie?
Well, this is the episode. Basically, it starts out with this. Basically, Johnny and Daniel have parted ways. Like I mentioned, they had this sort of epic fight, and they almost started fighting each other, and basically said "F you" to each other. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so now Johnny's regressed again. At the beginning of the episode, he actually walks into his old Cobra Kai buddy's church, because it was established that one of the original Cobra Kais is now a reverend, right? Not a priest, which he constantly has to. I like that, by the way, that he constantly has to remind Johnny, I'm not a priest. You know what I mean? I'm like a Protestant preacher or whatever. And so Johnny walks into this guy's church all drunk when the preacher, who's one of the original Cobra Kais, is talking about forgiveness, which I thought was also interesting because there's a lot of themes of forgiveness in Cobra Kai. So once again, I feel like in a lot of ways, the producers and writers are actually speaking through the character about some of their thoughts about why they're doing this, the themes of the show, which I kind of, I get it. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's really interesting that they do that. And they have the characters, literally characters like, preaching, you know what I mean? And he's talking about forgiveness. And Johnny's saying that's all bullshit and blah, blah, blah. He's drunk. He's causing a scene. And what I really love is that his buddy just kicks the crap out of him to get him to shut up, which is classic Cobra Kai. Right. That's Cobra Kai right there.
Yeah. So now I do know that we spent a lot of time with Daniel in this episode, and we find out that the public fallout from the brawl at the school, the rivalry between Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do, has definitely affected his business in a pretty big way, and it's weakened him to the point that this other rival car dealership, the guy that owns it, who we saw in the
Boba guy.
He basically comes back and he's hired one of Daniel's top salespeople, and he's kind of orchestrated
the one from season 1 who left the company.
And he's orchestrated this scenario where he's hoping that he's going to be able to basically buy Daniel out of his dealership, and then he'll be like, the number one dealer in the area or whatever. And what Daniel doesn't know, that's actually revealed by, I think it's his cousin, because the other guy talks to him and tells him what's going on, is that it turns out that the car supplier that they're purchasing a lot of their cars from, I think it was they call it like Diona or something like that, or Diona.
Yeah, it's kind of like it kind of sounds like Toyota.
Exactly. So it turns out that this company is based out of Japan, right? And it's interesting too, because I felt like in a weird way this reminded me of the original Karate Kid movies, because there's that scene where Daniel's at Miyagi's house that he has, right? And he's got all those cars around, and he keeps asking Mr. Miyagi where the cars come from. So where do these cars come from? He says, Detroit, Detroit. So you really wonder, like, what's the deal with Miyagi and all these cars? So it's interesting that how they kind of call back to that in a subtle way. But anyhow, so basically Daniel is going to lose his in with this car distributor that's been selling him his cars, and it's basically going to cost him his business because this other guy has orchestrated an exclusive deal, right? So Daniel's going to have to do some maneuvering if he's going to actually save his business, essentially. And it's interesting because his wife decides that she's on his side. They agree that they're going to work together to try and save the dealership. Because Daniel's been distracted this whole time too, because of what happened with season 2 and everything that's going on, and he's trying to find Robbie. It seems like Daniel's.
Well, as you mentioned, he had just caught Robbie in the previous episode, and that basically has kind of put a rift between him and Robbie, because Robbie now feels like he's been betrayed by Daniel. So now Robbie's actually in prison, and there's a really interesting dynamic with Robbie in prison. That Robbie basically becomes like a prison bitch. Like, basically he's getting beat up and picked on in prison.
Yeah, and I didn't enjoy watching that. I didn't want to watch that, but I don't like Robbie, so it does. I don't.
Oh, it didn't help me with Robbie at all. I'm like, wait a second, Robbie, you're like a dirty fighter. You know what I mean? We all saw what you did to Miguel, and now in prison he's acting like a little bitch and getting his ass kicked. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, that's one of the big takeaways, and
there's also the thing you talked about earlier, which is the whole thing of Johnny trying to raise money for Miguel's surgery.
Right.
He's actively involved in that. There's a funny scene where he does a job interview, and he basically starts talking about his prison rap sheet and stuff like that. Which I'm like, yeah, no bueno in a interview. I mean, Johnny is so out of touch. He has the thing where he tries to pawn the computer back to the pawn guy that sold it to him. Eventually what happens is he goes back to his stepfather. So we see that character again for briefly. He's still a freaking asshole. And Johnny, of all things, just decides to swipe a piece of like priceless art from his stepfather's house to pay for Miguel's surgery.
Right. That's Johnny.
That's Johnny.
Yeah. So, this is a fun episode. But the big thing I felt like from this one is just the fact that we realized that if Daniel's going to do something in order to save his business, And I was curious to see how they were going to do this. And then when it basically comes up, he's like, well, he's just going to take a trip to Japan. That happens in the next one, next episode. But he's going to take a trip to Japan, and then basically he's going to save the business by making this big business pitch, right?
Yeah, I really wondered how or why Daniel was going to go back to Japan. And what I felt was it was going to be like, the whole, like, I need to find balance. You know what I mean? Like, I need to go where it all began. You know what I mean? Because things are so screwed up. But they didn't do that at all. That's not the premise at all. As you mentioned, he's basically just going back to Japan because that's the corporate owner of his dealership, which sounds a lot like Toyota. So it's a Japanese car company. And in order to save his dealership, he feels like he has to go straight to the board of directors because his rival has basically screwed him and got the dealership taken away, essentially. In other words, he's not going to be able to get new cars anymore. So he needs to reestablish that relationship. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to get him back in Japan. I didn't expect that. And I thought it was actually a little, I don't know if it's better, but it's definitely, like you said, the show defies your expectations, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and it had been on the speculation that Johnny and Daniel were going to go there together, and that Robbie had run off to Okinawa. There's all this crazy speculation about what's going to be happening this season. And as we get further into this, you realize that the writers have their own interesting ideas. And I thought this was cool. I thought this is an interesting way to get Daniel to go to Japan, and then vis-a-vis eventually get to Okinawa. So,
and as you keep mentioning, as also another way to kind of defy your expectations, but in a good way, because I think Hollywood really F's that up. Game of Thrones really F'd that up in the last 2 seasons, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of hardcore fans. I consider myself a pretty big Game of Thrones fan as far as the series. And that show was always defying people's expectations because of all the richness from the books. But when they ran out of the book material, they started coming up with all this Hollywood bullshit that didn't make any sense to defy your expectations, but they made no narrative sense. This show does its homework and tries to make it make narrative sense. You know what I mean? We've already established that there's this asshole out there who hates Daniel's guts and has been going after his business. He alienated one of his employees, and where does that employee go? He goes to Daniel's rival. You know what I mean? So it's like they take little kernels of stuff they've already established, and then they pay it off in a way that, quite frankly, nobody expected, because I never saw anybody doing a Cobra Kai theory where they said that Daniel was going to go to Japan to save his car dealership.
Right.
I don't recall anybody ever saying that. So I think that's really cool. And then one other big important part of the character development in this episode, and another interesting conflict, is now that Robbie is in prison, of course, Johnny wants to visit him. And one of the reasons that he had basically got together, or one of the payoffs of him getting back together with his Cobra Kai friend, is that since he's clergy, he can get into the prison and he can get Johnny in there. But once again, we have this very kind of contrived situation. This is the soap opera. This is the soap opera of Cobra Kai. This is very soap opera. Johnny's placed in this weird position where after he's paid for Miguel's surgery, basically Miguel's grandmother and mom have found out about it, because when he was talking to the nurse, they overheard him. He didn't mean for them to know, but they found out. So now he's back in their good graces, right? And the grandma makes this plea for Johnny to stay with them and to pray over Miguel, because Miguel's awake, but he still hasn't had his surgery, I think, yet. Or maybe he has his surgery. No. Right. Well, Johnny's paying for it. He's just basically just paying for it. So once again, Johnny's put in this weird position because he's supposed to be going with his friend to go see Johnny in prison. But instead, he stays with Miguel and his family to pray over Miguel. And you've had this a lot. So this is kind of something that keeps happening, where Johnny is basically forced to choose between Miguel and Johnny. If you recall in season 2, that was part of what happened for the disaster, because Miguel was actually calling Johnny for advice, and Johnny ignored him. Johnny ignored him to spend time with Robbie and takes Robbie to school, and he ignores Miguel. Miguel was telling him that there's a problem, but Johnny ignored him, and then as a result, Miguel is paralyzed, right? So now, when we kind of, in this situation, it's kind of reversed, where now Johnny's feeling bad. I have to be there for Miguel, and he's there for Miguel at the cost of his own son, because he never shows up for the prison visit.
Right. Yeah, a lot. Again, like you said, a lot happens in these episodes.
Oh yeah, there's
Uh,
usually at least 3 or 4 story threads for
yeah,
each
a
character
lot.
going on in each episode.
We're at 1:15. Do we go ahead and go to the next one?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, cool. All right, so episode 4 is called The Right Path. The brief synopsis says, following an important meeting in Japan, Daniel visits Mr. Miyagi's hometown on Okinawa, and Johnny attempts to reconnect with Robbie. Now, this episode is the one that got the most emotional reaction out of me. One of my favorite movies of all time, besides the original Karate Kid, is actually Karate Kid 2. I've loved that movie ever since I first saw it as a kid. And it's interesting too. It's interesting too what the emotional reaction was for me because it wasn't where I expected. There was one thing I expected to see happen, and then there was something else I didn't see happen, and that's what got the emotional reaction. So, with this episode, Daniel goes. He meets with the car company people, and they're basically like they're kind of cold to him, and it looks like basically his days as having this amazing car dealership is probably done because he's not able to save things even though he tells his wife, he tells Amanda, he's like, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out. But it looks like pretty much, there is no good solution for him. Right.
Right.
And so
They shut him down.
Yeah. And in the midst
Not
of all this,
interested.
he's not sure where to go for answers. And he decides, I think he sees like a special on TV or something while he's in the bar. And he's like, oh yeah, Okinawa. So he decides to go to Okinawa to go back to Tomi Village. Right. And he's thinking, he's like, well, I'll just go there, maybe. I know he's thinking, because that's the point at which he probably could use some inspiration. He could use, to refine his center. I mean, he's definitely in a bad spot when he decides to go do this. So he goes to Okinawa, and I like how they did this too on the show. When he gets to Tomi Village is like a shopping plex, like a shopping, like it's not, and it's all these American businesses. That's the thing that's so hilarious. It's all these American businesses.
Yes, it's gone completely commercial.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I always talk about this idea. I hate in these movies and these TV shows where they go, you can always go home again. For some of us, you can't go home again. Like I love Grosse Pointe Blank, that movie where he tries to go back and then his house isn't there and it's like a convenience store, and for me, that's what my experience is like. Whenever I try to go back, to where my parents used to live, and I try to go back home, I can't go back home again. It's like everything's changed so much. It's like it's not even the same thing. It's almost like an alien planet. It feels like everything's so different. So Daniel tries to basically go back to Tomi Village and to reconnect with Miyagi, and lo and behold, Tomi Village is a shopping plaza. It's not what he thought it was. And it's sort of that old adage, you can't go home again. But in the midst of all this, they're also still celebrating, the culture of Tomi Village in Okinawa. And he sees this dancing exhibition going on. And then we see that Kamiko is there from Karate Kid 2. And so he reconnects with her. And that was kind of cool. I thought that was neat. I don't want to get to where I had my emotional reaction just yet, but I thought that was really cool. What did you think about that? Because I thought it was interesting. They have this idea that you can't go home again. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's there. It actually brings a lot of personal baggage for me, because I actually had a Japanese girlfriend at one time. I actually met her in the States. I met her in college. And boy, do I have some regrets about that relationship and the fact that I didn't pursue it more than I did. So it brought up some painful memories for me, quite honestly. Because it's just funny. It's just one of those weird things. You think about that kind of stuff from time to time. Of course, Daniel's in a different situation. Daniel's married. Of course, I don't like her character. So in a way, I kind of like had maybe a hope or expectation that Daniel and her, that this liaison might lead to something more than it does. You know what I mean? And it was interesting. I definitely liked seeing her. The actress has aged well. She looks very attractive, and I do like Japanese girls, as I just mentioned. So it's kind of it's an interesting dynamic between the two of them. Going back just a little bit in terms of, because you always have these multiple story threads going on at the same time. We do get back to Kreese, and Kreese is starting to really get into his teaching of his Cobra Kai. And one of the things that also happens in this episode is that Johnny does manage to go and see Robbie because Robbie is actually doing community service, and basically that doesn't go well. And Robbie sort of, in this instance, sort of justifiably so, is pissed because his father didn't come and visit him when he was supposed to. So I can't fault Robbie for that, even though I don't really like the character that much. But basically, that's not really going anywhere. When Johnny finally has his moment with Robbie, he's kind of like hitting a dead end. And so what that does is it kind of leaves things open with Robbie and puts him in sort of a sort of vulnerable position, right? Because basically Robbie feels like there's nobody there for him, and he feels abandoned by both Johnny and Daniel.
Yeah, and of course that's gonna leave an opening for the evil emperor to introduce him to the dark side of the Force coming up here pretty soon.
Yes.
Now, getting back to what's happening with Daniel in Okinawa, he and Kimiko, like, she takes.
We have one more story thread. So we got one more story thread, which is basically it's the callback to the soccer scene in the first Karate Kid film. So we still do have the rivalry between the kids. So we got the Miyagi-Do karate versus Cobra Kai karate. And what's interesting is what's happened is, in the absence of leadership, because there's a saying that nature abhors a vacuum. The absence of leadership, Sam has kind of taken over Miyagi-Do, which is this is the thing that I alluded to before. I was like, I'm not quite feeling this. You know what I mean? It's not. I don't. This isn't going to work. But the writers saved this whole situation and did exactly what I was kind of hoping. But anyway, Sam is kind of taking over the leadership of Miyagi-Do, and now she's sort of flipping the script in her own way, and she's kind of picking fights with Cobra Kai. They do this thing on the soccer field where they get into a fight with the Cobra Kais on soccer. It's very much a callback to the original Karate Kid, and definitely Sam is having some problems in this leadership role.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because Samantha at this point is still continuing to demonstrate her ability to make horrible choices. We talked about that.
That's great. I love that.
She hasn't really learned much. She's just continuing to still read the situation the wrong way and make some horrible choices. But I'm going to tell you, I still think I enjoyed her character arc the most.
It's interesting.
She kind of had to hit this point. She had to kind of realize that she was taking the Titanic right into that iceberg. You know what I mean? Like, she had to have that moment, before
she's not there yet, but she's
definitely not doing a good job.
She's not doing a good job. She's making things worse. Both sides are called in, basically the principal. They're both in trouble. She's again, she's stepping into that vacuum that's created because Daniel's gone and because his wife specifically told him karate's done. And so she's made the decision that, she's basically going to try to help these guys. And, it's just not going that well. And this is her first step into doing that.
And in the classic, school's going to solve the problem. They don't help with their weird, no, I don't know. They're
hugs not hits.
Hugs not hits.
Oh, that was a funny thing.
So bad. Oh, it's so bad. Yeah.
And they found like the most annoying. I mean, that actress, she is so good at playing that annoying, know-it-all teacher type, because I think we've all encountered that in one way or another. And it's just like, oh my God, you are so effing clueless about life. Why are they allowing you to teach children? You know what I mean? Because you don't know anything about life or how life works,
Right. So we get back to Kimiko and Daniel, and she has these letters that Miyagi had originally written to her aunt. And so in the midst of all this, she finds this one letter, and it kind of gives Daniel a little bit of inspiration, and it was almost like Miyagi is still talking to him even though he's not there. And we get a little bit more sense of what Miyagi's last days were like too. We get a little bit more information. It's interesting, but that wasn't where I had the emotional reaction. So the next day, right, they're going to get together, and Daniel's going to probably be going back soon, right? And he still hasn't figured out a way to save his dealership, but he's just going to have to go back, and he's going to continue to fight. Like, he has this resolve, even though he's not sure what he needs to do. And so he goes back to the Tomy village. He meets back with Kimiko again, and she has someone there that that she wants him to talk to.
That's episode 5, brother.
Is it?
Yeah. Episode 4 ends in a very other defined way. The big moment of episode 4 and the big reveal of episode 4. It's Chosen. Chosen walks in, and basically it's like a huge, huge moment when he walks in. And then it ends.
Yeah, but I was actually talking about where he meets the executive with the card.
That's the next episode. We're getting there. That's the next episode. I got my notes here.
I watched these all in one go, so it all runs together like one long story. It's hard to remember where these things stop and end.
No, the big reveal of episode 4 is Chosen. Chosen walks in at the end, and there's this like mouth dropping moment because obviously Daniel has no idea where this is going to go. He obviously has never talked to Chosen after the guy tried to kill him, which makes sense. And for some reason that we don't know, this meeting has been set up, it looks like. So he's now, that's Chosen. He's at the end. And now we're on to episode 5.
Right. So yeah, that's the big end. And he's not, it's interesting because Daniel's not sure what's going to happen. And the first thing he does is he bows. He actually shows him some respect. And that's kind of weird, right? Like, you're like, what is going on? But he's kind of confrontational, but at the same point, he's being sort of like agreeable. You know what I mean? But not like he wants to be. It's a weird sort of a scene, and it's hard to know how to take it. And then Kimiko reveals that basically she set this up, that she feels like that Daniel needs to spend some time with Chosen, and even though Daniel doesn't understand why.
Let's make sure we're setting up episode 5 first. So this is episode 5 is Miyagi-Do. All right.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Episode 5 is Miyagi-Do, and the summary I have says in Okinawa, Daniel spends time with an old friend and an old enemy who has much to teach him. The dueling dojo's rivalry comes to a nasty head. So it's aptly titled because we're basically going to get a secret from Miyagi-Do, which was kind of interesting. I don't know exactly how I feel about it. And then also the rivalry is now going to heat up between Miyagi-Do and Cobra Kai. And of course, again, Miyagi-Do at this point is essentially being led by Samantha.
Yeah, and not very well. So again, my apologies, I didn't mean to skip ahead, but yeah, Daniel and Chosen, again, like Chosen's been very kind of agreeable, you know what I mean? But at the same point,
we do get that flashback first. I mean, I think that should be mentioned. We get that flashback to show, where Daniel's mind is that Daniel's like reliving basically that classic fight from Karate Kid 2, where Chosen did in fact try to kill him. And that's what's basically going through Daniel's mind as he's looking at Chosen and like, why the hell is this guy here?
Right. And then, like I said, Kimiko, for some reason, feels like that they need to spend some time together. And we don't realize at the moment, but we find out later in the episode, is that she realizes that they both kind of need some closure. And basically and basically she and him have actually reconnected at some point, and they've found closure between the two of them for what happened. You know what I mean? And so it's interesting. It's really interesting, this whole kind of dynamic. I didn't expect it to go down like this at all. But part of it, it did kind of play out kind of the way I thought it was going to, but not exactly. So anyhow, basically,
it is also interesting. I just want to mention that one of the things that also comes out of this is that apparently Kimiko never married. And I thought that was a little bit weird. That was a little strange, because I thought maybe that was going to open things up, and it really didn't. So that was a weird decision, I thought.
Yeah, it was. There's an article too where the actress who plays Kimiko talks about how she kind of had sort of like some things that she wanted to see happen with her character. So it's hard to know, whether that was what the writers wanted to do and the producers wanted to do versus things that she kind of wanted to see, for her character. It's always curious about that kind of idea.
Well, she even says that it's like hard to find somebody that would fight to the death for you. In other words, Daniel kind of has ruined her for all other men. That's kind of the implication of that line. I thought that was interesting. That was a little weird.
Yeah, it is. It is. So in the midst of this conversation between Chosen and Daniel, he doesn't understand why it is they're supposed to be talking. And, it comes out that Daniel makes the comment, well, Mr. Miyagi never kept things from me. He taught me everything he knew and whatever. And then Chosen's like, are you sure? And so basically at that point, we go off to essentially Chosen's home. He's got a dojo in there. And they basically decide, Chosen, which actually means challenge, Chosen essentially challenges Daniel. Will show me that, that all of Miyagi-Do karate since you're supposedly an expert on it, right? And so, and then we also learn too that in this, basically in Chosen's house, that Chosen has inherited a lot of sort of artifacts through Sato.
Yes, from Miyagi-Do karate.
Back. Yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting because it's almost like a callback. Well, it is the callback, to the dojo scene from Karate Kid 2, but it's actually within Chosen's home. So the two of them, they put on gis and they go at each other.
It's rematch time.
Yeah, and it seems like Chosen definitely has the upper hand. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Chosen seems like he has some new tricks up his sleeve.
And it kind of comes out in the midst of all this too that maybe there are certain things that Chosen obviously has learned from Sato, right, through Miyagi's father, that Miyagi did not necessarily give this knowledge or this information to Daniel. And it's interesting how it kind of all unfolds. And in the midst of all this, we actually see some weapons training, which is interesting because I'd wondered about that when the one episode, when all of a sudden, Daniel's swinging around a bow staff. It's like, when in the world did he learn that? So it's interesting. They kind of get us some more of that sort of bow staff kind of fighting stuff as well. And in the midst of all this too, we are still following the kids. And tell me if I'm wrong, Eric, but this is the episode where Samantha decides they're going to spring a trap on the Cobra Kai kids in order to teach them the lesson, and it gets flipped on them, and it all goes to heck in a handbasket really fast.
Yes. So basically, this is in this episode. We have the situation where again Sam is kind of like the de facto leader, if you will, because Daniel is gone. So the Miyagi-Do people are kind of going to her for advice because they have no one else to go to, no one else to turn to, and Cobra Kai is still ratcheting things up at this point, and they're not going to let things go, especially after what happened in the soccer match. Again, Sam does not make good choices. That is something consistent. I like that you call that out, Dave, because that's so true. She makes lots of terrible choices that lead to more problems and make the situation worse instead of better. So one of the things that happens is that basically one of the Miyagi-Do kids works at the Golf and Stuff. The famous Golf and Stuff that everybody goes to, that we get all those beautiful montages from. One of the employees works there, and the Cobra Kais decide to screw with that particular Miyagi-Do guy at his work. And that's kind of, obviously that's kind of one of those things where, yeah, you're definitely sort of crossing the line. This guy's at work. You know what I mean? Why are you bothering him? And they're being dicks. They're being jerks. You know what I mean? And again, there's this big absence of leadership. So the Miyagi-Do people are like, hey, Sam, we got to do something. And basically, she does decide that they are going to do something about this situation. So it's like escalating. She's not making the situation any better. She's kind of making it worse. You know what I mean? Because she's going to start taking it to a different level. And basically, I think this is actually the moment where she decides that she's like going to formally start training these guys again. That they're going to start to get ready because maybe they're not ready for a big fight with the Cobra Kais. So she's going to step up now more formally, where she essentially is taking over Miyagi-Do, like literally, like even the actual physical place.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing. For me, I thought it was weird to see her trying to, put herself kind of in that position. You know what I mean? That she was going to be the one to, kind of make the decisions and, get everyone in line and whatever. And she really thinks that the only way that they're going to be able to solve this problem is to go after, Cobra Kai head on, to meet essentially force with force. She thinks that
Right.
pushing back is going to solve their problems, and it, of course, it doesn't. It makes it even worse.
And I have to say, this is one of the things. It's like, I'm not a big Samantha fan. I've said that before, and it's kind of interesting that the different perspective of maybe the reasons I dislike her, some of the reasons you like her, but it's like one of the big problems I have is she's not very convincing as a tough karate person. The actress is small. She has a very kind of feminine voice. You know what I mean? All that stuff. Interestingly enough, even though I think they resemble each other a lot, the actress who plays Tori, I think she sells it a lot better than the actress who plays Sam, as far as, where you can kind of feel like she's like this, got that attitude and chip on her shoulder. And, she would be kind of the person that would kind of gravitate to be the leader or something like that. I don't feel it with Sam. I feel like the reason maybe like narratively you could justify it is that Sam is Daniel's daughter. So that's why the Miyagi-Dos kind of gravitate towards her. Technically, she is the student with the most experience. But I don't really, as far as like that actress acting the way she does, I don't really see that a lot. Like I don't see a lot of girls like that start their own karate gang, because essentially that's what Miyagi-Do has become. Because Daniel's not there, there's no adult supervision. They're basically becoming a gang, much like Cobra Kai is. It's kind of a weird thing that's going on there.
Well, and in my time back in the day, having been an instructor and a martial arts student, I have seen those women that seem sort of very kind of demure and whatever, but do have the ability to surprise and be stronger than you would expect. So I never really questioned any of that, other than the fact that, like I said, if you pay attention to the solutions and the choices that Sam makes, they are completely horrible. She can't help but make the worst possible at times kind of decisions, and she always takes a situation where maybe she's kind of headed in the right place, like her heart's in the right place or her mind's in the right place or whatever, and she's like, we got to do something about this. And then when she makes the choice, it's like, no, that's gonna just pour gasoline right on that fire, and she does it over and over again. And in this episode, it's one of the worst, because she really basically leads the Miyagi-Do students into essentially they think that they're going to pay them back and surprise them, but instead it's basically it's not really a double fake, but you know what I mean. It's like the Cobra Kai basically springing a trap on them.
Tori's been kind of absent as far as like not in the narrative, but as far as the Miyagi-Do people go, no, Tori's kind of out of the picture. She got arrested. She's on probation. She's not at school anymore. Nobody's seen her, not realizing that Kreese has got her back. And so they have the big sort of secret weapon moment where it seems like maybe Miyagi-Do is going to kind of pay back Cobra Kai, but then Tori shows up, and now we see that Sam has been really traumatized by the whole ordeal, and she's scared of Tori at this point, which actually I thought that made a lot of sense because of the physical scar and all that kind of stuff. So that actually makes sense to me that Sam would have some issues with her, even though technically she won the fight. So she has some issues, and essentially Sam leads the Miyagi-Dos into defeat. It's a disaster.
Pretty bad.
And she runs away. So it's kind of interesting to see, again, Sam's making all these bad choices, while at the same time, Johnny is not. Johnny really starts to step up with Miguel. Johnny has kind of taken over as Miguel's therapist, which is kind of funny. There's a funny scene with the real therapist, the professional therapist, who's just like a total piece of crap, in my opinion. And they can have some fun with that. And Johnny takes over and does sort of the definition of tough love, and basically really starts pushing Miguel. And then, of all things, the big breakthrough in Miguel's therapy is a D. Snyder concert, which that was kind of that was a fun thing, showing because he would definitely think Johnny would love D. Snyder. That makes a lot of sense. So Johnny's way of curing Miguel, and it's effective, is to take Miguel to a D. Snyder concert, because he realizes all the work he's been putting Miguel through. Miguel is still a kid and needs to have that moment. And they have a big breakthrough, and actually Miguel's able to move his foot, which is pretty cool.
And we have, besides Miguel realizing that he is going to be able, he can move his foot. The other two big things that happen in this episode too, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of them is that we see the escalation of Hawk. We haven't talked much about Hawk yet because
No, we're not
we're
there.
continuing to follow. Is that not it?
If you're talking about the return of some characters and a big change in Cobra Kai, we're not there yet. That does not happen in episode 5.
I
If
thought
you're talking about the return of some characters from season 1 at Cobra Kai, it's not
the return. I thought that this was the episode where didn't Hawk break Dimitri's arm in the big brawl?
That's right. That's
what I'm talking about.
That's right. Yeah, you're right.
I actually
forgot about that. Yeah, that's part of the big defeat, obviously, for Miyagi Do Karate is he kind of does go. That's right. I actually forgot about that.
That's interesting too, because when that moment happens, that's when I began to think that Hawk was going to go all the way to the dark side and may not be able to be redeemed, because that was really brutal and violent.
It's funny I didn't remember that because I don't like Dimitri, and I know I love that moment. So, but I did binge watch this just like you did. So, in order to get my points, I just had to go through the timeline, and then I took notes to try to make sure that I had the chronology and stuff like that of the different events. And that wasn't one of the images that pops up when you just go through the timeline.
And I do have 2 more things I want to hit real quick, and then I'm done. So the other one is, which I consider a lesser. I want to get to when I had my emotional moment. I want to do that one last, even though that doesn't happen last. We return back to, again, we've got Chosen and Daniel training. And Chosen introduces this idea of doing these pressure points as something that Sato had taught him, that obviously Mr. Miyagi had not actually talked to Daniel, and talks about how that, you can use that, when you realize that your opponent is not going to stop until they kill you. And this is a way that you can take away essentially their weapons, take the fight from them, essentially, is by temporarily disabling them by using these techniques. And it kind of gives Daniel a new tool to come back to America with. And I thought that was interesting. I thought it was an interesting way to kind of, have kind of Miyagi, kind of him learning something new about Miyagi Do karate and growing, as a practitioner, and I thought it was interesting that lesson would come from Chosen, kind of indirectly, also from Sato. So I thought that was interesting. And then my last point I want to make, this was the moment where I had my emotional reaction, which I didn't even think this was going to happen. It didn't even clue in to me. So there's the lunch meeting where Kimiko comes back into play, is where Daniel's going to go back, and he goes out there for a lunch meeting. He thanks Kimiko for having him reconnect with Chosen, and he even though he doesn't exactly know what he's going to do, he's ready to go back and fight. And then she's like, well, wait, I think you need to talk to my friend. And this friend turns out to be a vice president, a high-ranking executive, actually with this company that Daniel had gone out there to meet with. And it turns out, and this one I didn't see this coming, it turns out it's the little girl that he saved in Karate Kid Part 2.
Right.
And it was interesting because at one point he had saved her life, and now she's going to save his business. And my jaw was on the floor. I didn't see that coming. And I actually had a genuine emotional reaction to that, because I just thought it was amazing that they called back to that. Because that was a big pivotal moment, because that was the moment where, Sato wants Chosen to go out and help Daniel, and he won't do it. And then Sato goes out and helps Daniel rescue the little girl and bring her back when the tsunami is hitting Tomi Village. And that's the point where, Sato tells Chosen, now you are dead to me, and that's a big moment in that movie, and it just brought all that kind of back. And I just thought that was amazing that the writers thought, because I didn't see that coming. I didn't even think about that. Now it's such a cool Karate Kid 2 callback. So I really loved that particular moment.
Yeah, it's amazing how these guys, the creators of Cobra Kai, they really do like I know Ralph Macchio and William Zabka have said this. It's like this is their Star Wars, and you can really tell. Like they are taking some of the most obscure characters and really putting them in the limelight and making them relevant. it's amazing the way that they can do that. And by the way, a lot of people at Lucasfilm could really learn a thing or two from them, no doubt, because that is really interesting. I didn't see it coming either. And it is a really interesting way. And they even say directly, again, it's almost like the writers talking to the audience, to the characters. Like, Daniel says something like, hey, the things that you do come back to you. You know what I mean? So it's like, he saved this girl and now she's going to save his business. You know what I mean? So it's all very much cathartic, and there's a lot of karma there and all sorts of philosophical stuff in this little, this really kind of contrived moment in Cobra Kai. But they delve into the lore really heavily. Just to sum up on the episode, there is a interesting thing with Kreese. Kreese does reach out to Robbie. He's actually kind of putting the seeds in his head, it looks like. And then, of course, in the aftermath of the golf and stuff fight, Daniel's wife comes in and actually has a confrontation with Kreese and slaps him, which is going to become relevant quite a bit in part 2, along with sort of the final big reveal, which is a payoff from season 2. Payoff from season 2. We actually get to see Johnny friends Allie on Facebook. And, there was a whole thing where he finally, decided to use the computer and all that stuff. And we see Elizabeth Shue as she looks today, which was really a fun moment for me because I love Elizabeth Shue.
Yeah, and it was interesting. It was there was so much that happened in this particular episode. And it's interesting, too, because since most people binge watch it, you don't have to have all these dramatic moments happen in episode 5, but there's a lot of important stuff that happens in this particular episode. And it's just one of those things that it has you like, oh, we got to go to the next one, and the shocks, the reveals, the twists, and the drama just gets, even ramped up even more. And again, we'll talk about this on the next episode. We get to part 2, but we have another crazy brawl. It's not quite as crazy as season 2, but I was shocked that they managed to find a way to work another brawl into season 3, because I didn't think we were going to see that again. But they found a way to fit it in. A little surprised.
And, we actually did miss something kind of relevant from episode 3, because one of the things that sort of amps up why Sam starts to kind of take over Miyagi-Do is in episode 3 there was that they had the car wash to benefit Miguel,
right, yeah,
to raise money for his surgery, and basically the Cobra Kais stole the money and beat up the little Miyagi-Do guy that was protecting I guess for whatever reason he was the one protecting the money, and they beat the crap out of him, stole the money. So she mentioned that's kind of the impetus of why Sam starts to take over in the first place.
Yeah, and the whole thing is too, like, again, as a part of Hawk's story, Kreese is constantly, in all the different episodes trying to find different ways to kind of amp up Hawk and push him to be more brutal and more brutal and more brutal.
Yes.
And Hawk is just totally, it's weird because you can feel some reluctance in him, but at the same point, you can see him wanting to prove that he belongs and just going along with the program, even though there are times when you can tell that even in the midst of doing something, you can almost see it. The actor who plays Hawk does a great job because you can really see that conflict in him, going back to the Star Wars idea. I know there is good in him. You know what I mean? So it's interesting.
There wasn't really a conflict in season 2. I have to disagree a little bit.
There's
a deliberate choice in season 3 to put that in there. But in season 2, I mean, he one of the big things, we even had the Rogues Gallery chime in on that. Like, people were like, man, when he saw that Medal of Honor, it's like, this guy's a dick, you know what I mean? That he's kind of like irredeemable at this point. So it is kind of interesting what they do. The seeds are definitely there. They are showing a little bit of doubt with Hawk, but at the same time, he's doing these incredibly over the top, messed up things. So I don't know if I'm going to agree with you on that. And that might be the best way to end this, because we're going to get there in part 2 as far as the transformation of Hawk.
Right. Well, and I'm just going to say, it wasn't there in season 2, but I feel like you could definitely see it in the actor's eyes because they want you to start questioning that. And you do kind of in season 3. The actor does a great job of kind of subtly, kind of giving you all that information so that you can kind of see where the character's going to go. And I think that directly relates back to the fact that he wants to be tight with Miguel. Like, he wants to be friends with Miguel, and Miguel clearly is not going to go there. So but yeah, it would probably drag on too much.
Yeah, we're not back
yeah.
to Miguel at this point.
Yeah.
He's wiggling his foot.
Right. Okay, so that's going to be it for our Cobra Kai Part 1, episodes 1 through 5. Again, it's a lot of material to try and cover. And then, again, next week, we're going to do Part 2, just like we did earlier, I guess last year. I can say last year now. Last year, actually, with Cobra Kai Season 2, where we did it in 2 parts. We're going to do that again with Cobra Kai Season 3. So Part 2 will be next episode. Hope you'll join back, and we'll continue our conversation about Cobra Kai Season 3. Very cool. All right, so I know you had some pop culture, some different things you want to get into, Eric. Let me set it up real quick, and then we'll just get into talking about the stories that you have.
If you don't mind, I think we're beyond setups at this point. I just
okay. All right, we'll just go right into it.
Because I tweeted about it, and I want to just make sure that I cover it, and I'm going to have to be really quick. We don't have a lot of time. We'll probably go over a little bit, but we definitely don't have a lot of time here. So pop culture news segment, I did have a couple breaking stories that I wanted to go ahead and address. One of these actually originally this actually was broken by our friends at Orville Nation. PJ actually broke this originally, and Bounding Into Comics did an article on this, and I thought this was really, really interesting. I don't know if you've heard about this, Dave, but I actually even reached out to PJ personally to get a little bit more information on this, but Bounding Into Comics, I think, summed it up very nicely. So Bounding Into Comics has this article that says Star Trek Deep Space Nine actor Avery Brooks is willing to return to the role of Captain Sisko. Now, this has been a rumor that's been out there in a lot of different forums that Avery Brooks is being approached. That's the way I've heard it, that Avery Brooks is being approached by CBS All Access to reprise his role as Sisko for some sort of Deep Space Nine reboot. And I've heard all sorts of crazy rumors about why that hasn't happened or what's going on. Well, this is the information that we got from someone that actually, I think, does have inside information. So Star Trek Deep Space Nine actor Cirroc Lofton, that's the person who played Jake, has revealed that his co-star Avery Brooks is willing, quote, and ready to return to the role of Captain Sisko for a future Star Trek adventure. So this is where it's going to get a little more interesting. So Lofton obviously played Jake Sisko on Deep Space Nine, and currently he has a YouTube channel called The Seventh Rule, which he actually started with Aaron Eisenberg. In fact, I remember talking to Aaron Eisenberg at Star Trek Vegas when he was promoting this. So kind of a cool thing that Cirroc is still doing this. And anyway, the people from The Seventh Rule were on our friends at Orville Nation. PJ had them on as guests on his show. Excuse me. So during the live stream, the topic of the conversation turned to Brooks' nearly 20-year absence from acting. Lofton asserted that it was the result of Brooks, quote, kind of being discriminated against, unquote. He said, quote, I think it needs to be said because this is an important time we're living in where we're becoming more socially aware of the types of things that are regressive in society. Things that are racial, sexual, and all kinds of revolutions we are having in thought and acceptance of people. He says, to that end, Lofton then noted that while Brooks currently appears to have no agent, the actor would definitely be interested in returning to the Star Trek universe if the opportunity presented itself. Quote, to say that he's not wanting to act is actually kind of ridiculous. There's no question that he's willing. This is a take on the story that I did not expect, and this is something that, again, is like kind of almost like breaking news. I think this was an episode of Orville Nation from last week. I did even reach out to PJ about this story because people were picking this up, but obviously Bounding Into Comics picked this up because what I've constantly been hearing, the rumor mill out there, all right, is that supposedly CBS All Access has been approaching Avery Brooks to do a Deep Space Nine series. And actually what I heard was he wasn't willing to do it because they didn't want to involve Cirroc, because they basically didn't want him to have his son. They want to do something completely different. But it sounds like from the real insider, the guy who actually did play Jake Sisko, Avery Brooks has somehow been blackballed for some weird reason. So it's not just him not wanting to do this stuff. He's not being approached. So this is a really crazy story. I don't know if you had heard these rumors before about a Deep Space Nine reboot, Dave, or any of that stuff. But I don't know if you heard this latest, these statements from Cirroc about Avery Brooks.
I hadn't heard any of this. I mean, I would love to see Avery Brooks come back and play Cisco again. Captain Cisco was a great character. Deep Space Nine is one of my favorite of the Star Trek, television series that they've made. I think it's a great universe to return to. My only fear, in all honesty, which has nothing to do, unfortunately, with this information, is just I would be fearful for him to return to play Cisco under the current regime.
Oh yeah,
So
I've said it many
that's
times. I am done with New Trek.
yeah,
I am done with it. They have wounded me too many times. Basically, as long as it's Kurtzman, right? Kurtzman is the guru
yeah,
of Trek right
yeah,
now.
right.
As long as he's involved, I'm not going to support Trek anymore. I will support classic Trek. I still got Heroes and Icons. I talk about that all the time, where I can watch, all the way from TOS to Enterprise as much as I want. I can tweet with people about it. That's my fandom for Star Trek right now. I am not going to deal with new Trek at all until Kurtzman is gone.
However, if Avery Brooks, wants to return to acting, I can think of a certain Star Trek inspired, property that he would be ideal for.
Oh my God, that's awesome. That would be great.
So
Unfortunately,
I'll throw that out
Sirach
there.
is saying is he doesn't have an agent. The other thing that I've heard about Avery Brooks, and actually a lot of this comes out of the documentary that William Shatner did called The Captains, where he did these intimate interviews with all the people, including all the way up to, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek. He went through all the captains in Star Trek up to that point, had intimate interviews with all of them. And the one with Avery Brooks, he came across as extremely eccentric, and you kind of felt like he doesn't want to act anymore. And the other thing was the big topic of conversation at the last Star Trek Vegas when they released What You Leave Behind, which is the Deep Space Nine documentary. Everybody noticed the absence of Avery Brooks in that. And what the producers said was that Avery Brooks was very supportive of the project, but he felt like he had nothing more to say in Star Trek. So there's also that narrative that's out there. So we're seeing like 3 different narratives now, which is really kind of interesting depending on who you talk to.
Well, it's interesting. Like I said, I could think of something that he would be amazing to have in. That he'd be amazing.
I agree.
For, but as far as this other stuff goes, if it's true, it's unfortunate. He was incredible in Deep Space Nine. I remember watching, talking about Hawk. I remember watching him play Hawk back in Spencer for Hire. So, he's a great actor, and I'd love to see him, do more stuff if he wants to act. But no, I hadn't heard a lot of this. I honestly, I'd seen that same documentary you're talking about that Shatner had done. I just assumed that he was just done. That he was just enjoying, teaching acting and inspiring kids, and kind of fostering a new generation. I thought that's that he was doing, and that was his focus.
Yeah, it's interesting. So again, that's sort of a different take. And again, I give all credit to PJ for having the folks from the Seventh Rule on there, and for getting Sirach to talk about this. It's definitely interesting perspective, and that is an actual real insider there. Did you have anything for pop culture news, Dave?
No, I didn't have anything for pop culture because I figured we'd run long on Cobra Kai. So I figured, anything that you wanted to cover, we could cover, but that way we didn't have to worry about me rambling too much.
All right. Well, I'm sure we could have fit something in there, even if we go a little bit long. But this is a story I think you're going to like. So I had another one that this was in my tweet, so I feel obligated to go over these. So this is a CNET article. We have talked about this before. But this is just sort of, I guess, confirmation of what's going on. So the headline reads, Michael Keaton, Robert Pattinson, and Ben Affleck will all play Batman in 2022 films. And it says, holy trio of actors, Batman. DC Films is going big with the multiverse concept. And it says, ready for multiple Batmans? Michael Keaton and Robert Pattinson will both take on the role of the Caped Crusader in separate Warner Brothers films in 2022. Ben Affleck will wear the cowl one more time the same year. This is just from the New York Times. They revealed with a recent interview with Walter Hamada, who is the president of DC Films, so you would assume he would know. It says parallel worlds where different versions of a superhero exist simultaneously are old news to comic readers, but DC Films now will attempt the multiverse concept in upcoming movies. This is what it said. It said that some had interpreted that Warner Brothers is doing 2 franchises starring Batman. one with Patterson, one with a new actor. And they said, he says, is that correct? Or are you referring to Keaton as a second Batman being part of a non-Batman centric saga? And it says, Barnes responded with one word, Keaton. So it says that Keaton is definitely reprising his role as Batman. So it says that Robert Patterson is basically doing his version, and that his version, which has Edward Cullen playing Batman, it'll exist in a universe dubbed Earth 2, which will feature new actors playing familiar characters. Another film universe, Earth 1, will feature actors who are continuing to play characters they've already portrayed, including Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. So it says what happens to Patterson's Batman on one Earth doesn't also happen to Batman in the other timeline. Keaton and Ben Affleck will both play Batman in the 2022 film The Flash, which Hamada says will link those two universes. Keaton is returning to the role he played on screen in 1989-92, and the film will apparently reveal what's happened to Keaton's Batman since he last played the role. This also mentions that it looks like Affleck is done after this. So this is interesting. We've talked a lot about the multiverse, Dave. This is obviously some confirmation of some things that I think we've already heard, but it is interesting. And it does sound more and more like Keaton's role is going to be very substantial in the Flash movie.
Well, all I'm going to say is that if DC intends to do this, they better get on with it. I love all this. This sounds like fun. I love the idea of, Keaton returning to play Batman. I'm curious about the Pattinson movie. I love Ben Affleck as Batman. All this stuff sounds great. All this Earth 1, Earth 2 stuff sounds awesome. I'm a diehard DC guy. So all I'm just going to say is that, we got WandaVision starting up here pretty soon. That's going to introduce us to the concept of the multiverse in the MCU. So by the time that they finally get something going, I feel like Marvel will have already tread this sod 2 or 3 times, and given us 3 or 4 different. Technically, they've already introduced us to this idea. Sony did with the Spider-Verse movie.
Yes. Sony is actually ahead of everybody because the Spider-Verse concept is firmly entrenched at Sony with Spider-Man.
So this all sounds great, and I'm excited about it. But my only fear is that Marvel is going to beat DC to the punch yet again. And so that's my fear. That's all I got to say about it. This sounds great.
I got to throw this in because we talked about it last week as well when we were talking about the multiverse concept. The other thing I keep hearing more and more of is the Favreau-Filoni-verse. People are starting to use that term, and I think that's deliberate from Lucasfilm. I think they are going to basically give Filoni and Favreau their own multiverse concept in Star Wars. I really feel like that's coming because they have a lot of shows, the Ahsoka show, the Republic Rangers, and then also the Boba Fett show. And everybody is talking about the Favreau-Filoni verse and is starting to use that term. So I think even Star Wars might be DC to this multiverse punch as well.
Yeah, so we'll see. Like I said, I love this idea, but we'll see what the execution's like when we get there. So and I, like I said, it's like when they first started making these announcements, they sounded great because we've been hearing about this for a while. But it's like this Flash movie has been in development, it seems like, forever. And I want them to make the Flashpoint movie because it means there might be a chance I might see my name on the big screen because I worked on Flashpoint for DC. So I'd love to see Gal Gadot as the mirror universe evil Wonder Woman. That'd be awesome. I'd love to see that. You know what I mean? But we got to get there first. So that's my fear, is that by the time they get around to this, I think Marvel will have already been there and done that. So
yeah, yep. And like I said, I think even Spider-Man has done it, and Star Wars may beat him as well. We'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah. So, well, there you go. Cool. Do you have something else for this week?
I did briefly want to talk on get on Streaming Wars. So let me take this one down. And so obviously we always try to do some streaming wars coverage on this show. We are very short on time. So I'm going to be very, very brief on this streaming wars coverage. I thought this was interesting. I am a numbers guy. I dislike sometimes when people claim inside information and they have no evidence of it. And hey, if you admit that it's a rumor, that's great. And a lot of the platforms are good at that. That's one thing I like about Doomcock. Even Doomcock, he does a lot of rumor stuff, but he always does a disclaimer and says this is rumor. But a lot of these other sites don't. And they try to play off the rumors like they have some sort of inside knowledge, and I think it's bogus. And the thing is, they almost never use any kind of numbers. But this is a Verge article, and I just thought it was interesting because, I've been wondering about this, and it says Wonder Woman 1984 and Hamilton's 3 biggest lessons for streaming. And it says 2 of 2020's biggest movies are streaming juggernauts. So obviously there's a lot to this article, but the main takeaway I want to give is that they use several, analytics, one from a company called Antenna, and then they also use a research firm called Screen Engine. Okay, so they basically these are sites that, or entities that are meant to try to figure out numbers for these different streaming platforms and such. And it says Wonder Woman 1984 and Hamilton were 2 of 2020's biggest films, at least where streaming was concerned. It said recent third-party data suggests both releases drove crowds of subscribers to their streaming platforms. And I just wanted to kind of put that out there. So, there's a lot more to this article. We're short on time, but it does appear that both of these properties basically did what their companies wanted them to do, which is drive subscribers to their platform, where they've seen a bump in their subscribers. Now, one thing this article also brings up is retention. And we're not going to know about Wonder Woman 1984's retention rate for a while, right? I don't think you're going to have people that just, because it's a monthly service, right? So people aren't even at the end of their monthly service at this point if they decide to sign up for HBO Max just for Wonder Woman. So we don't know if the bump is permanent, but I do just want to put it out there that apparently there are some actual numbers out there, some people that really look at this stuff, and it appears that Wonder Woman 1984 has worked, at least for streaming. And I think as the box office, they're over 100 million now worldwide. So that's how they're doing as far as the box office. So Wonder Woman appears to have done fairly well at this point for Time Warner. And also, I think it's interesting that Hamilton is the one that they single out for Disney Plus and not Mulan, which gives me some hope.
Yeah. Well, again, we'll obviously see how this unfolds. But it's interesting. It's interesting. I mean, of all the different models, I do like what they did with Wonder Woman, even though I felt like, unfortunately, the film was a bit of a misstep.
Oh, yeah.
I did like the fact that I was able to just, I had a subscription to HBO Max, and then I could watch it when it was available, and I'd have to jump through any extra hoops for that. So I did really enjoy that. So I definitely hope that's more, the approach that they're going to take moving forward, because it does add value to those services. Because otherwise, it's like if you have to have the service and then turn around and also pay a rental fee, like what they were trying to do with Mulan originally, I definitely don't like that at all. Definitely not as a consumer. I don't like that one bit. So
I hate that. I've been adamant about that. So I'm kind of happy that at least with this article, they're singling out Hamilton as the one that really seemed to give Disney Plus a bump. The only other thing I'll say is I feel like Time Warner, AT&T, they almost had a perfect model that could have really helped and kind of, been good to everyone if they just gave the theaters like a 2-week exclusive window. If they kind of followed more what Universal is doing, because I like what Universal is doing, and that they have a very small exclusive window, and then they can, release their films wherever they want. Universal obviously does have Peacock, so if they want to release their films on Peacock after that exclusive window, they can do it. You know what I mean? Or they can sell it to Netflix and try to make money that way. That's another thing that these companies do, right? So that's the only thing I'll say about the Time Warner model is I feel like even though it definitely has given the theater industry a little bit of a jolt, far more than what they had. But if they had just given them like a little exclusive window and then put it on HBO Max, say after a week or two, That would be something. And then I think they would almost have the perfect model.
I agree. I totally agree. Very cool. All right. You have anything else for this episode, or do we think that's good?
I'm just going to mention it briefly. Is apparently kind of breaking news, and it's there's not much more commentary you can say on it, but we do try to cover Orville stuff on here, and I am going to mention that apparently the Orville. This is from a Cineblend article. I'm not going to put it up, but they've hit another setback, and due to COVID restrictions in LA County, they are shut down again at least until January 18th. So I just want to put that out there for Orville fans. I know that we try to cover the Orville stuff. This stuff actually kind of hits me because, I was just filming in LA for staycation. What was it? The weekend of November 13th. So I was out there and I saw sort of what was going on firsthand. I was a little bit shocked. And then apparently it's gotten much worse since I left, where they basically shut down everything. So Orville apparently is on hiatus again, at least until January 18th because of the COVID restrictions. Dave, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was just kind of reacting to that and just saying that, I understand, you know what I mean, that the situation's very fluid, but it's unfortunate. I feel like it's unfortunate. I was hoping that we would have a return for the Orville soon, but my only fear is like by the time they actually get back to the Orville, I wonder, how much damage will have been done. Maybe there'll be more anticipation. I don't know.
That's what's circulating. That's what's circulating is that basically Orville's going to be done. The third season is going to be the last. And there was someone that started that rumor a long time ago and said that was always the intention. No, that was not always the intention. But all these delays and things like that, you got to wonder what Disney ultimately is thinking because they're the ones that own Hulu. So this is an ongoing story. Again, this is breaking news. By the way, there were other productions that were in that list that were also being put on hiatus. Hopefully, they will start going, on that date that they say. We'll see.
Wow. All right. Well, if you don't have anything else, I guess we'll just go ahead and go to the outro if that's good.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, I'm going to save everyone the plug. I'm just going to say thank you for watching this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. My name is Dave Beatty, and I have been one of your hosts. Eric, please tell the folks hopefully watching and listening home where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
Oh, I'm still going to plug you, Dave, for sure. Remember Kirby Tees, everybody. That is Dave's shirt company. That is the official home of Retro Rogues merchandise. So just remember KirbyTees.com. And then also, if you want to contact me, I'm most active on Twitter. I'm at BassGod14, at BASSGOD14. That's also the official Twitch. That's also the official YouTube. For this format, this specific show. So if you do any comments or anything like that, more likely than not, I'm the one that's going to be responding. I am always open to show suggestions. I would love to get some of that rumor email that I always hear these other channels getting. That would be cool. Give me some rumors. That would be fun. So maybe we can start doing that on this show. So anything you got, please feel free to contact me. Again, my DMs are open on Twitter. And of course, also keep in mind, our sponsors. Again, we talked about Kirby Tees, but my company is Bad Bob Productions. That's our respective logos right there. And then as far as the Rogues Gallery goes, Jane just said, great show. And we'll go ahead and leave her with the last word.